mentalspod.com, advancing life science research, connecting people and ideas.
Welcome to the program. Today we have a superstar of biotech joining us, Una Ryan.
Find out how to promote your brand by underwriting quality content. Go to mentalspot.com/underwriting.
Una, how would you like to be introduced? You have such a long list of accomplishments and your career has been so varied.
Oh, I'm Una. That's all
Just
you need
Una.
to know. Yes. Lots of people say Una, but I actually pronounce it Una as if it had a Y in front of it.
Una, like unique.
Yes, but I don't mind. I answer to almost anything, including, hey, you.
So you've really done it all. I mean, you were a research professor.
Yes.
Then you moved on into business. You were CEO of a public company, board members of all kinds of organizations, including chair of MassBio.
Yes.
For over 10 years, the trade industry over in Boston. And then you went on to investing. And I have to say this, in 2007 you received the Albert Einstein Award
Yes,
for
that was
outstanding
fun.
achievement.
Mhm.
So congratulations. And then you moved to the San Francisco Bay Area about a year ago.
That's right, yes.
And you're chairing a new nonprofit, the Bay Area BioEconomy Initiative.
Yes.
So really looking forward to the chat. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, it's such a pleasure to be here.
Why the Bay Area?
Actually, the move is something I've been wanting to do for some years. I have two daughters, both of whom chose to live here. And my husband and I had a large New England house, and we thought it was the ancestral family home where everybody would come for holidays. And as my kids had their own families, they didn't. And they would sort of say, well, you guys can come and sleep on our floor. And that was fine, but we realized there was no point in keeping a large house back in Massachusetts. We wanted to see the children and grandchildren. And what kept me there was, after that public company, I actually did 2 more startups. And I have the entrepreneurial bug. I was very involved with the industry in Boston, Cambridge. And it was hard to leave, so I kept dragging my feet and saying, oh, we can't sell the house, you know, and then finally we just lowered the price, sold the house, and came here.
So this entrepreneurial bug,
Yes.
When did it come?
Well, actually early on, as a very small child, I had this missionary zeal. When I was about 5 years old, I saw a movie about a missionary doctor who was visiting a village in Africa, and there was a little boy who had lepresy and was taken away from his village and from his family, and it just broke my heart. And I said, when I grow up, I'm going to cure all these dread diseases. And then as I grew up, I worried about excelling at school and getting through college well and getting a job like everyone else. And I realized that I'd sort of forgotten this childhood mission of saving lives. And I thought, after I'd been in academia for maybe 20 years, just writing papers and writing grants and seeing that the dean doesn't take away my space isn't really what I set out to do. I haven't saved any lives yet. I haven't really reduced any pain and suffering, so I went into the industry.
And it was a reconnection, actually, with a passion from way back. when you
Yes,
were
and
5.
people always talk about the need for mentors who keep you on track. And I had lots of people who've helped me. I've been very lucky, but I never really had that one mentor. And I think if I give credit to anybody, it's my 5-year-old self who mentored me through that next phase, which was to keep remembering what I'd set out to do.
So would you sort of block out time and go back there and sort of look for guidance from this period?
It wasn't that I kept sort of going back into the inner child. I'm not that psychologically adept, I think. But I just kept reminding myself And there are lots of times when you're running a company or starting a company when things don't go well, and you have to have something that goads you to keep going, you know, even in the Churchillian sense, you know, never, never, never give in. And as long as you remember why we're in this industry, which is to reduce pain and suffering, to save lives if we can, and to help where we can, it gets much easier to deal with all the setbacks along the way. And so I would revisit that memory. But I don't think I really re-entered that period of my life, nothing that dramatic.
It's amazing how much the 5-year-old already knows.
I think you're very noble and you have a lot of wisdom when you're 5, and we get distracted as we get older into things, as I said, like making sure you still have a parking space at the medical school. You know, that really wasn't what life was about. But I started finding myself preoccupied with grant scores and tenure, and I realized that I wanted the end of the equation, and if I joined the industry where I could perhaps help hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people I didn't know, it was as good as being a psychiatrist or a surgeon where you actually touch your patients. And my husband's a surgeon, and I've always admired how much people have come back to him and said that they owe him their life or their spouse's life or something. And so I've always wanted to contribute and remembered that child in me.
So you have such an overview of the industry because you participated at these various levels.
Yes.
And so what are your overall thoughts on how well we're doing at that end game with relieving pain and suffering?
I think we're doing amazingly well. And there are ups and downs in the industry. I don't think it's a cyclical industry the way maybe the large chemical industry is, construction or real estate are. But there's no question there are ups and downs. But I think on balance we're doing incredibly well. And I mean, I have very, very personal ways of thinking about that. When I was in my 20s, I was still in academia, and I was involved with the localization of ACE, angiotensin-converting enzyme, which controls blood pressure on the lining of blood vessels. And it was then a radical idea. Everybody thought this enzyme was in plasma. I was an electron microscopist, so I wanted to see it on the walls of the blood vessels. And so I did a lot of work that led to studies of endothelial cells. But the point I wanted to make to you was that I now have normal blood pressure because I take an ACE inhibitor. So the industry actually used that data and has produced drugs that millions of people take. And it's very encouraging for me to see in my lifetime how, in that case, academic research coupled with industry brilliance put drugs on the market that are so useful. And if I may take a sip. My husband has AMD, age-related macular degeneration, and he has to have injections directly into the eyes, intravitreal, but they use an antibody to VEGF, vascular endothelial growth factor, which was a project I ran when I was in a big pharma company.
So it's come all the way around.
So it's, you could never persuade me that the industry hasn't done well. There are times when certain stocks have a hard time. There are times when it's difficult to raise those dollars for your clinical trial or whatever your next stage is, and I desperately regret that for those people caught in the loop. But on balance, the industry has done a power of good to a lot of people.
We've done a couple shows on the image of the pharma industry being lower than ever before.
Yes.
Any thoughts on that? Because you're right, the medications are put out there, it's saving lives, it's making people healthier, and yet big pharma is
Well, I think you have the key there. It's big anything. It's a sort of
it's this
American thing that
Okay.
when you're little and struggling and poor, we love you. But once you become successful and big, you become a great grey they, and people don't know you anymore. And I think there is a sort of arrogance to success that turns people off. And I think I personally completely understand the need for big profits, because there's so many failures and the cost of development is so high and so long and so risky that I don't resent the cost of drugs at all. But I can understand that people do. People say, you can make this pill for a few cents. Why am I being charged so much? I understand. And I think perhaps it's our fault that we haven't explained clearly enough. I think it's also a fault of our education that we don't always explain to people the science behind some of the things that we do. And if you don't understand it, how can you appreciate it? So I can see both sides, but as I said before, I think it's a wonderful industry with the right goals that's doing a lot of good.
Now, your main project right now is this Bay Area BioEconomy initiative.
Yes.
What is your goal there?
Well, I came from having to struggle with the Boston-Cambridge axis and get people to work together there, and now it's a smaller area. It's close to the Massachusetts State House, so it's easier in some ways for everybody to get along and collaborate.
Back in Boston?
Yes, and when I came to the Bay Area, I was impressed with how big and wonderful and spacious everything is here, and I was walking around with my head in the air looking at the views, but I also realized that it's a long drive, difficult roads sometimes to get to see everybody, and people don't really collaborate across these big areas. So, you know, there's a focus in Silicon Valley, Palo Alto, Stanford, there's one in the East Bay around Berkeley, and then there's all the foment and excitement going on in San Francisco, especially in the biotech part of the industry. But I've seen it so often. There is a lot to learn from people who are close to your exact industry. When I was in a Fortune 500 company, it was Monsanto, which was then chemicals, agriculture, and pharmaceuticals. And I realized how important it was to learn from the chemists and the ag people what they were learning. And again, things could be a bit siloed and people didn't really talk in the separate companies. And I feel the same here. You know, we have all of these great computer scientists who are making health and wellness apps, but who suddenly realize that they've come up against a highly regulated industry, doctors with foibles, patients who have their own quirkiness, and everybody wants to help the other. But if we don't talk and serve the exact needs and rules and regulations of each side, it's not going to be as productive. So what I want to do is get people geographically and by discipline to talk to each other and collaborate for the greater benefit of patients and the economy.
What would an example of that be?
Well, we just had a symposium which we held at IDEO on the Embarcadero, January the 28th. And we had 3 programs that we sort of highlighted. One is called PACT, the Partnership to Accelerate Clinical Trials. So one of our goals is to accelerate the clinical trial process, which can be absolutely a nightmare if it's a multi-site trial for one company, because you have to have a separate agreement with each hospital and with each group of lawyers. And you know, you may have 60 sites, or even if you have 12 sites, that's a lot of hospitals and lawyers to negotiate with. So this is a wonderful initiative that has put together all of the California institutions and payers into a single IRB, Institutional Review Board, with one legal agreement. And it's so popular, it's now going to spread across the country. And that's one example of shortening the time of drug development, speeding the drugs to people more quickly and more cheaply.
So the different institutions that used to have their own
will now work in one.
They're okay being part of that.
Well, that was the skill for the people who put this together. So it was led by someone called Clay Johnston at UCSF, but
Yes.
it involves all the UCs in the area and almost all the payers. So it's been wonderful, but I think the legal agreements and the permissions that you have to get were the stumbling blocks, and they've done an amazing job, and I think can tweak that as it goes on. So that was one thing. The other one I feel is that we need to get some of the knowledge from the industry, senior people in the industry, more quickly to those startup academics and scientists. And so we highlighted a program called Catalyst, which started at UCSF, but which matches faculty with experts for their particular startup in the industry. And of course it helps with the funding and eventual partnerships. And that's the kind of program that started in one institution, and we would like to see it spread to the whole of the Bay Area. So now we want to see if we could take it beyond UCSF. And of course that will bring new problems. But it's all about collaboration. And the last one we highlighted was QB3, which is not started by BAB, the Bay Area BioEconomy Initiative, had started and is very successful, has 2 sites and is coming up with a third. But the questions we were asking is, where do those companies go from there? You know, they get incubated. How do they become freestanding, tax-paying adults?
I guess their hope is that they get a round of funding by the time
that's why we need to bring the angel community, of which I am part, and the VCs, together with some of these. So I'm all about collaboration, speeding, and simplifying things.
Collaboration's been an important topic for us, and we've covered this open science movement.
Yes.
All the way from open access journals, just so that the research is open, and we see continual movement there. Just this last week, Elsevier said they were going to open up some of the data, so that this is data that's been behind paywalls, but open up for research.
That's great.
But then also we've heard that theme in big pharma. And we've featured Bernard Munoz on the program, for instance, talking about if big pharma shared more and worked leaner, we would lower the price of drug development. And it's always struck me with all of these sort of open initiatives, collaborative, that it does come down actually to some kind of legal agreement, creative legal agreements. So you were talking about the IRB agreement with the PACT, and it just made me think that's what you see in the various areas. Yes, it's good to share more, but on the other hand, you have to protect IP and offer business security.
Yes, and privacy.
So what are your thoughts on?
Well, I'm a huge believer in IP. I've done a lot of work in the developing world and in global health, and people always feel that patents get in the way. I don't at all. I think they enable. If you protect knowledge, you get it funded, and that way you get it developed and it gets to people. So again, I'm a very, very strong advocate of the patent system. But I think one should share. I think one should share pre-competitively. But I do understand why companies can't just open their doors. I mean, just as I will open my house to my guests, but it doesn't mean I'll let the public live there. You know, it's... I think people have to have walls, and I mean, all the fuss we have about spying between countries is because we do have secrets and we have to preserve them. So a lot of what we have to work on, as you said, is the absolute legal spelling out of what belongs to whom and what is shared and what is not. And I think if it's understood, it can be achieved.
Now, the second component you mentioned, the catalyst, which is bringing researchers from academia and pairing them with certain entrepreneurs, is that right?
Well, not just entrepreneurs, sometimes with senior leaders from the industry, either still in the industry or who have retired from the industry, who have amazing contacts. And, you know, if you've been in the industry long enough, you've made all the mistakes, or most of them, and that's how you learn, and that's really the knowledge you need to transmit to people, is what not to do.
So the industry leaders could share that knowledge with these
and they
folks
do
from academia
very generously,
with the idea that they may be commercializing some of their research.
Yes, but I don't think it's even as selfish as that. I think people are very anxious to impart their experience and wisdom. And yes, if it does come back to benefit the company, so be it. But I don't think they're doing it that way at all. They're doing it to help the industry and to help young people not flounder around the way they did, perhaps make different mistakes.
The UC system and Stanford have this strong tradition of people call Stanford an incubator for
Yes.
Silicon Valley.
Yes.
What have you noticed about that as you've come here from other parts of the world?
I think it's wonderful. Next, on the 20th of February, we're having an event which will feature incubators. So we will start at QB3 at 953. We will probably visit the J&J incubator there, go on to Bayer, and then go on to Rock Health. And those are the ones that have physical labs and buildings around them. But then we will have a panel discussion with the FAST program from Bay Bio, from Spark, from Stanford, from Breakout Labs, from the Thiel Foundation. And we really want to focus on all of the ways that the Bay Area helps and supports its startups. And so I'm a huge incubator person. And some people call them co-locations, and some people call them universities. But anything that nurtures the companies along is big with me. I'm not a huge believer in what I would call the fish model, where you throw a lot of eggs in the sea and one or two survive. I like the mammal model, where you nurture people to adulthood. And that's, as a mentor and angel investor, that's what I like to do, is help a few.
That's a nice metaphor. That really is. So as an investor, you're an angel investor, what are your principles for investing?
I
And I hope you'll talk about women companies here too.
Exactly. Well, what better go? I have been very fortunate. I've had a rocky road. If you were to hear my history, I wasn't born with the silver spoon. But I realize I've been very fortunate, and I can invest in other people, and I wanted to help women get started in the industry. I feel women can get into academia. They can get into the sciences, but it's very hard still for women to get their startups funded and to a point where they're self-sustaining. So, having spent many years trying to help disadvantaged people in the global world that we live in, I decided to focus closer to home, come to the Bay Area, see my family, and try to help start up women in this area. So I belong to two angel groups that focus on women-founded and women-led companies. One is called Golden Seeds, that is across the country, and one is called Astia, particularly Astia Angel, which invests. And they're both wonderful organizations because they fund, but perhaps even more importantly, they mentor and coach the women who start these companies. And the good news is everybody does well. The returns are very good from women-led companies.
Are there specific areas that you like
Yes.
in life science today?
I'm a life sciences person, so I have tried to focus on the life sciences, but they are high-risk, high capital-intensive, and sometimes long timeline companies. So I do try to balance my portfolio with some non-life science companies, but I very much like synthetic biology, as you know from seeing me attend some of those meetings. I have some device companies, but I also have health IT and some things that are not in the life sciences at all. I have a chocolate company. I think that's very good for wellness, but
I do too.
It's not actually my own area of expertise. But I coach a lot of people with just fascinating companies. I've got one where they're putting magnetic organelles into cells, and you can use them for imaging. We've got platforms for clinical trials. I have a catheter for pancreatic cancer. And anywhere where I feel success for that company will do good, will be good for the industry, good for patients.
What is the secret to a good board of directors?
2 or more women. I think it's very important to have diversity on a board, and I think a woman's voice, and you need 2 women sometimes to have the woman's point of view heard.
2 women, because if it's just one,
you tend to get dismissed. I mean, I don't like that concept because I never like to be dismissed, but that's what the statistics say. So I feel it's very important to bring my perspective to boards. So I sit on public company boards and private company boards, and I'm an active board member. I contribute, I mentor, and I coach. So whether it's a startup or a listed company, I feel it's something women should do because their voice is different and needs to be heard.
So with synthetic biology, some really exciting technology there, and at the conference where I met you, you were like, bring us products.
Exactly.
We love your technology, but really bring us products. And that's a challenge to find commercial applications.
Well, I don't know that it is. I think they have to find unique applications that can only be solved by synthetic biology, not just things that are cheaper or quicker than what we have now. But I was really addressing more what you were talking about the pharma industry not being popular with the press and the public. I think the public doesn't want to hear about all the clever technology. They want to know what's useful, friendly, cheap that I can use. And that's the message I think that field needs to understand. You know, I was part of the vaccines industry, and it's tragic to me how people don't accept vaccination as the absolute miracle prevention system that it is. It's saved so many lives over the years. So I don't want the synthetic biology world not to remember the public needs to have things made clear about benefit.
So I read that you were made an Order of the British Empire by the Queen.
Oh, it was wonderful.
Speaking of women, what was that like for you? Did you meet the Queen?
Oh, yes. It was more exciting. You know, I've had a lot of very nice awards and done a lot of very nice things in my life, but it was the one most exciting thing to go to the throne room in Buckingham Palace, which I was told is as high as 3 double-decker buses, and to have all the guards playing as you walk in. I have to tell you, it went to my head. I loved it.
Thank you very much for joining us.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Find out how to promote your brand by underwriting quality content. Go to mentalspot.com/underwriting.